During the early years in New Westminster history, the only way to cross the Fraser River was by boat. However, as the city grew, people wanted more efficient and convenient ways to cross to surrounding communities. Once railway arrived and cars became more common, boats could no longer support the demand for travel across the river. Bridges were the solution to this problem of transportation. New Westminster's bridges had an enormous impact on the ways in which people and goods got where they needed to go along the Fraser River. The first bridge connection from New Westminster was to Lulu Island. In 1889, New Westminster acquired a portion of Lulu Island from the provincial government, and this area eventually became known as the neighborhood of Queensboro. This first wooden swing bridge to Lulu Island serviced both foot and wagon traffic, and it opened November 30th, 1891. It was the main link between Queensboro and New Westminster proper. By the early 1900s, the Lulu Island Bridge was already needing significant repairs, so in 1909 it was replaced. The new structure was built to also accommodate rail traffic. The old bridge was completely demolished the following year. In 1912, the bridge was again modified, this time to accommodate automobiles, and streetlights were added. Many New Westminster residents have vivid memories of the early bridges, usually related to the inconvenience of waiting for ships to pass beneath before traffic could cross. In her book, A Century in a Small Town, Evelyn Sangster Benson shares some recollections about the bridge. Lulu Island teenagers really appreciated the old bridge. What a perfect excuse it provided for being late for curfew. And around 8 in the morning, tug after tug kept the bridge open, giving the kids a perfect excuse to be late for school. Queensboro mothers would have shuddered had they known that their kids, mostly boys, used to have contests to see how many times they could jump across the gap between the opening span and the solid bridge deck before it got too wide. As time passed, the amount of traffic over the bridge continued to increase, such that by 1951 there were again serious doubts about its integrity and safety. So much so that the British Columbian newspaper published an article discussing the issue on the front page of the July 21st edition. The article described the issues with the bridge's long-term stability and listed the different proposed solutions and their associated costs. Ultimately, the decision was made to build a new bridge to handle all of the automobile traffic. The Queensboro Bridge, which is still in use today, opened in 1960. It was 3,000 feet long, 60 feet wide, and boasted 4 traffic lanes. Tolls were charged on the bridge until November 1966. Once the bridge opened, people no longer had to compete with river traffic to cross over to Queensboro, but could do so by car at their convenience. Bridges not only provided connections between New Westminster's neighborhoods, they also served to connect the royal city to surrounding communities, chief amongst them the city of Surrey. The first bridge to cross over to Surrey was the New Westminster Bridge. On July 23, 1904, it opened to both automobile and rail traffic. This was an important day for New Westminster. The editor of the Daily Columbian wrote that, "For a generation it has been the ambition of New Westminster to have a railway and traffic bridge across the Fraser at this city, and now realization of this ambition is so near at hand." The sense was that the bridge placed New Westminster upon the highway for transcontinental traffic, and as a result, a new commercial and industrial era was going to open up to the area. The first ever train crossing of the bridge was made that day by a train from Victoria which had been loaded onto a steamer for the crossing to the mainland, and which then proceeded on the tracks to New Westminster. A bottle of champagne was used to christen the tracks after the passengers, many of which were local politicians, had disembarked. Also a swing bridge, this bridge was designed with a center section that would pivot open, allowing ships to pass. It also had 2 decks. The upper deck was for vehicles and the lower was for trains. The bridge cost about $1 million to build, and because of this cost, the New Westminster Bridge was tolled. While there was great initial excitement about the $1 million bridge, as it was called, this soon gave way to complaints about how high the toll prices were going to have to be. Adults had to pay 5 cents a trip or buy a book of 8 tickets for 25 cents. Interestingly, the tolls on this bridge only lasted until 1910. Even so, the bridge was the primary method of crossing the Fraser for automobiles until the opening of the Patella Bridge in 1937. It is impossible to talk about early swing bridges without mentioning their tenders. A bridge tender's job was a challenging one, since he was responsible for regulating all the traffic on and under the bridge. This required a knowledge of the mechanics of the bridge, training in the equipment to move the center swing section, as well as the ability to prioritize who should go first to keep traffic moving as smoothly as possible. William Furness and George Rennie were two of the bridge tenders in New Westminster, with Furness holding his position for 38 years. Not long after the New Westminster Bridge's completion, people had already begun talking about the need for a bridge exclusively for automobiles. The New Westminster Bridge had trouble keeping up with the amount of traffic and the weight of industrial loads it was required to hold. During the 1920s, the construction of another bridge was one of the main political topics of discussion, and by 1922, public demand called for a new bridge instead of continuing to repair the old. Because of this, plans were made to construct what would eventually become the Patella Bridge, the most famous and recognizable of New Westminster's bridges, due to its unique shape and design. Walter Pruden, a New Westminster local who worked on the Patella Bridge's construction as a young engineer, notes why a new bridge needed to be built.
The old railway bridge had a problem. It was too narrow and one way only, and long delays were necessary to get across. And in the summertime, this was very difficult for the cars standing in the hot sun in the late afternoon. Radiators would boil and children would cry and people would get impatient waiting for their turn to cross the bridge. So that is why the emphasis began to have another bridge that would serve Westminster in a better way.
The Patella was constructed right next to the existing New Westminster Bridge, and when the Patella opened, the New Westminster Bridge was used exclusively for railroad traffic. The Patella was named after BC's 22nd Premier, Thomas Dufferin Patella. It was Patella who advocated for the bridge to be located in New Westminster. He believed that even though the cost of construction, $4 million, was high, the location would provide much-needed economic stimulation to the area. The substantial cost was also offset with the use of tolls up until 1952. The Patella was constructed by the Dominion Bridge Company and Northern Construction and J.W. Stewart Limited. The construction was a major project, and in the process some houses had to be demolished or moved to make space. A section of Albert Crescent Park was also lost as a result of the bridge's construction. Ultimately, the bridge opened on November 15, 1937, and is still in operation today, at least for now. There are plans for an entirely new bridge to replace the aging Patella, since repairs are becoming expensive. The new bridge is expected to open in 2023, and after it is finished, the Patella is to be dismantled.